NFL executives list some Buccaneers among the best at their position, but they ignore one key player. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. No ads, no hashtags, nothing like that. Just one-on-one text conversations with me. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We have a couple of mailbag questions coming up for you in a little bit. First, I want to send my apologies for not having an episode on Monday. The insiders, I texted all of them, let them know I was up at Bowling Green State University dropping my son off at hockey camp. Yes, the same Bowling Green State University where Scotty Miller played his collegiate ball. And I said, hey, send in your mailbag questions. Let's get a mailbag episode going for when I get home later tonight. Got home. We had lost internet at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Didn't get it back until almost noon on Tuesday. Insider David had texted me and said, we lost power. I had to cook dinner in pots and pans on our grill outside. I don't know what happened. I was way north when the storm hit. It was nasty, but we are here with you today. I'm going to bring you a bonus episode this weekend to make up for missing on Monday. I promised you guys 5 episodes a week. You're getting 5 episodes a week. So bonus episode coming this weekend. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now what that weekend's episode is going to be. I am going to bring you my pre-training camp 53-man projected roster. That will drop over the weekend. But let's kick things off on this episode talking about ESPN doing some articles from Jeremy Fowler where they went to league executives, coaches, and scouts to compile the top 10 players at each position. So far, they've listed the quarterbacks, running backs, defensive tackles, edge rushers, safeties, tight ends, interior offensive linemen, and offensive tackles. They're going to unveil off-ball linebackers, wide receivers, and cornerbacks throughout the rest of this week. I will bring you updates on those as those happen. But let's get caught up on what they've done so far. And there were some Buccaneers featured in these top 10 lists. We're going to go through real quick in order as far as who they were. Antoine Winfield Jr. was the top safety listed in this ranking, but his lowest ranking was 7, meaning somebody, at least one person, put 6 other safeties ahead of him, which is absolutely insane, and likely someone from the Falcons, since Antoine haunts their sleep and lives rent-free in their brains after what happened last season. One NFC executive said, quote, he had more opportunities as a single high defender to take throws away with his instincts, range, and creating turnovers. He was already excellent in run support and as a blitzer, so it was the perfect combination, end quote. Tristan Wirfs was rated the 4th best offensive tackle behind Trent Williams, Penei Sewell, and Laramie Tunzel. Wirfs' highest ranking on anyone's list was number 1, but his lowest was also 7. And I just, for the life of me, cannot fathom how anyone could have listed 6 offensive tackles over Tristan Wirfs. There's arguably, in my opinion, 1 that you could put ahead of him, but 6, that's just plain ignorance. An NFL personnel evaluator said, quote, he's so blanking talented that even though it was an adjustment early in the year and he had been dominant on the right side, He started to play at a high level later and was much better as the season progressed. Super athlete, real light feet, broad, slides well, end quote. Then an AFC scout said, quote, the things he can do at his size are rare, end quote. Vita was the top honorable mention among defensive tackles, with an NFL coordinator saying, quote, dominant run defender and his pocket push to help whoever is rushing on the outside look good is what makes him great. Easy for linebackers to play behind him because he constantly draws doubles. He had a down year last year, but was still a major problem, end quote. Baker Mayfield was outside of the honorable mentions and was listed as also receiving votes among quarterbacks. No Buccaneers were listed among the edge rushers, tight ends, interior offensive linemen, and I saved this for last intentionally, running backs. Here's the running backs list. Here's your top 10. Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne. Honorable mentions: Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker III, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift. Others receiving votes: Kyron Williams, James Conner, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, Najee Harris, David Montgomery, Ramondre Stevenson, Austin Eckler. Not a single vote for Rachaad White. Not one. I talked about Rachaad on Friday's episode, and he was top 10 in quite a few categories among running backs last season, top 15 in almost all. And he couldn't get a single vote on this list. You honestly want me, you want Buccaneers fans, you want other people to believe that guys like Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, Tony Pollard, these kinds of backs are better than Rachaad White. On the worst rushing offense in the NFL last season, he had the 14th most rushing yards of any running back in the league. He had the 4th most total yards among running backs, and he did it without an interior offensive line. If I'm Rachaad White, I am taking this very, very personally. This is bulletin board material. This list named 25 running backs, and his name wasn't one of them. This isn't some media list. This isn't some social media list. These are NFL scouts, executives, and coaches. You want to put the league on notice, Rachaad White? You want to get out there and get the attention of these guys? It's time to dominate this season. And I realized that on Friday's episode, I said that he can't do it alone. And Bucky Irving has to step up in a big way and help him out. And that remains absolutely unequivocally true. Rachaad has 2 years left on his contract. So this season is going to start to set up what kind of contract he's going to get as a free agent, if he even hits free agency. These people that created this top 10 list, the honorable mentions, the others receiving votes, they're the ones that are going to make the free agency decisions. They're the ones that are going to go out there and look for players to bring in and help out their offense or help out their defense and bring in someone that can do something that they don't already have. Now, of course, I would prefer that Rachaad White stay in Tampa, but there is a lot at stake for him over the next 2 years. And it appears that he hasn't moved the needle outside of Tampa at all. All of these NFL guys named 25 running backs that they collectively think are better than Rachaad White. That is not going to get him any kind of attention on the open market if he gets that far. Rachaad said that he wants to do whatever he can to help the team win, and he wants to end the 1,000-yard rusher drought. I get the feeling that he also wants to put these guys in their place and show them how bad they messed up by ignoring him on this list and naming 25 other players that they believe are better than him at the running back position. I mean, that puts him at the bottom of the starting running backs. And yeah, there are a couple of teammates that are listed on here. You have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, both in Detroit. You have a declining Derrick Henry. We'll see if he revitalizes things in Baltimore. Josh Jacobs was a non-factor for most of the year last year, and now because he's in Green Bay, all of a sudden he's going to be great again. Aaron Jones is his teammate in Green Bay, and he's sitting there getting love on there as well. This is the kind of thing that players will pin up in their locker heading into the season and leave it there all year and almost make, a list of players that I'm going to top that guy. I'm going to top that guy. I'm going to top that guy. Think about what Amon-Ra St. Brown does with all those receivers that were drafted ahead of him. He keeps that list constantly and reads it before every game. Maybe Rachaad has an incredible year. Maybe he doesn't. But if he has an incredible year, I'm not going to be surprised one bit if we learn that he was going through and reading all of these names before every single game. And he was out to prove these executives, these coaches, these scouts, exactly how wrong they really were. Speaking of putting people on notice, we got a mailbag question from a long time everydayer. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We've all got our own goals and aspirations, but it's easy to fall into the trap of comparing yourselves to others, especially online. Whether it's what someone else has, what they're doing, where they're going, how they look, social media certainly doesn't help, but social media isn't reality. Therapy can help you refocus on the things that you want instead of what others have so you can start living your best life. It never hurts when you have a destination in mind to speak with someone unbiased in your life and help you navigate the best way to get there, because it's never going to be a straight line. There are going to be detours and roadblocks along the way. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. Plenty more to discuss regarding the Buccaneers. But in the meantime, do you want to hear the latest news from around all sports? You have NBA and NHL free agency still going on. NFL news, because the NFL never sleeps. You have the Olympics coming up. You have the WNBA. You have the MLB. You have all kinds of things. But you want to hear more than just the national narratives and the biggest stories without the manufactured fake screaming. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will say this much. I was genuinely surprised that Baker Mayfield fell into the also receiving votes category in that poll that ESPN wrote up. Now, I've expressed my opinion on whether or not he's a top 10 quarterback, but that's neither here nor there. According to those polled, there were 16 quarterbacks ahead of Baker Mayfield, including Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud, Jared Goff. And fine. At this point, it's whatever. Nothing new here. Same song and dance, all those cliches. However, I had a question roll in from Ricky, better known as Destined for Greatness on Twitter and in the YouTube chats. And he said, I would love to hear what you think the narrative would be if Baker does produce back-to-back career years. Personally, I would love to see the national media trip over themselves to come up with some excuse as to why Baker produced when he's not a good QB. Ricky, thank you for that message. I apologize that it took me so long to get to it, but here is where I stand. If Baker goes out and has 4,000 plus yards, around 30 touchdowns, around 10 interceptions, for a second year in a row, you can't ignore him anymore. If you doubt him, if you dismiss him, if you ignore him, after having done that 2 years in a row with 2 different offensive coordinators after his career was deemed DOA, then it's just straight up personal biases clouding the judgment of his performance. It's refusing to acknowledge his abilities to be a leader of a team because he's not a marketable player or he's not on the sexy, popular team in the major market. It is, at that point, actively trying to hide his success for the sake of promoting someone else that's either in a bigger market or because that player gives the appearance of being more marketable. They can be in State Farm commercials and Subway commercials and Nike commercials and whatever the case may be. And forget it if the Bucs go to the playoffs again. All those numbers plus back-to-back playoff appearances to extend the Bucs franchise streak out to 5 straight years, keeping them as the only NFC team to make the playoffs every season this decade. Like, at that point, it's over. You cannot continue to just brush him off and consider him a non-entity. Baker is going to be Baker, and that still rubs people the wrong way. I am old enough to remember when you couldn't watch TV without Baker being in a commercial for something. More often than not, it was insurance. Now, nothing. Talking heads want to give the credit to Dave Canales, and now he's going to get Bryce Young to live up to his potential and have this huge second year in the NFL, and the Panthers are on the rise and blah, 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 blah. Baker was a huge reason that the Buccaneers were a good football team last year. Baker is a huge reason that Dave Canales has a head coaching job. Bryce Young is a huge reason that Canales is going to lose that job sooner than later. You go back to when, that process was happening. I said on this show, Dave Canales needs to not go to Carolina to be the head coach. It is not a good situation for a first-time head coach, and he may end up like Raheem Morris, where it's going to be 10 years before he gets another opportunity if he gets fired from that job. It's bad ownership. It's a bad quarterback. It's a bad program. Stay away from it. Here we are. I'm sure we're going to hear plenty about how it was Liam Cohen and not Baker Mayfield if the Bucs have success and Mayfield puts up career numbers again. Cohen is going to be talked about for a head coaching job the same way that Dave Canales was, and he's going to be given the lion's share of the credit. And a big reason for that is because he's from the Sean McVay tree, and the media love McVay. Don't get me wrong. Sean McVay is a great coach. He's a really nice person. He's very kind. He's very polite. He's personable. He's a lot of fun to talk to. And that's why the media loves him outside of just his coaching success. But it'll give them someone other than Baker to give the credit to. And believe me, they will find any and every way possible to do exactly that. At this point, I think Baker not only has to match last season's output, but he has to exceed it. And if the Bucs can get past the divisional round of the playoffs and into the NFC Championship, Baker will establish himself as someone who just flat out cannot be overlooked, diminished, dismissed, anything. He will have to get credit from those that don't want to give him any now. And maybe that's exactly what it's going to take. Maybe it's going to have to be the Bucs being in the Final Four. Win or lose, that doesn't matter. But that's what it'll take for them to be taken seriously, for their quarterback to be talked about on these lists and rankings with some level of respect that he flat out hasn't gotten, for there to not be a full offseason where I have insiders texting me and Facebook messages and tags on Twitter or DMs on Twitter saying, hey, James, look at this list where the Bucs got hosed again or got disrespected again. And, we have a whole Falcons situation where everyone's talking about how great they're going to be, just like the Saints last year, and no one's talking about the Bucs. And I'm not saying that I don't appreciate those of you that send me those messages. I absolutely do. You guys have been awesome all off season, especially during these slow periods. And it shows how passionate you are and that you want me to call out these things and discuss these lists and talk about where they got it wrong or where they got it right in some cases. But at some point, it has to stop. And people need to wake up to the potential and the ability of this football team. Stop trying to tell us that the Chicago Bears are special and that Caleb Williams is the next Patrick Mahomes because you want Chicago to be relevant again. Stop trying to tell us that Kirk Cousins is the knight in shining armor riding in on his horse to save Atlanta football like he's special. Pay attention to what is actually happening and give credit where credit is due. Ricky, I hope that answers your question, but I have to say that I think Baker could have 4,500, 30, and 10, and he still wouldn't get the attention or adoration that he truly earned or deserves. One final mailbag question that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. You want to catch an upcoming Rays game? Tickets when they host the Reds start at $38. Then it's the Marlins coming to town. Tickets starting at $26, followed by a very important AL East battle with the Orioles, and you can get seats starting at $22. Right now, you can also get Buccaneers regular season tickets starting as low as $51, or see the return of Steven Stamkos when the Predators come to Amalie Arena starting at $128. And all of these prices feature GameTime's all-in pricing, so there won't be any surprises when you get to checkout. You can wait until the last minute when prices drop by as much as 60%, or buy them now knowing you have GameTime's lowest price guarantee, which means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime is going to credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And shout out to Insider Fausto, who sent this one in. Fausto said, "You mentioned in the last show we've struggled to draft running backs. However, we've also struggled historically to draft quarterbacks and pass rush. So my question is, which position would you say definitively are we the worst at drafting?" Fausto, what a fantastic question. And I gave this a lot of thought on my drive home from Bowling Green. It was a long, lonely drive in the rain. And to me, the answer is obvious, and it's quarterback. You probably all know the history of Buccaneers quarterbacks, but in case you don't, no Buccaneers quarterback drafted by the team has ever gotten a second contract. Now, it looked for a hot minute like Jameis Winston was going to get a second contract, but that fizzled out in his last year with the team and his first under Bruce Arians. So the Buccaneers have drafted 25 quarterbacks in their history. 2 of them, they used the number 1 pick. Another one they took in the top 10. They took 2 more in the top 20. They have taken 8 within the first 3 rounds of the draft. The law of averages tells you that they should have hit on one of those at some point, even just by accident. For all the misses that the Bucs have had at running back since Jason Light became GM, they still have a decent history at drafting the position in general. Warwick Dunn, James Wilder, Cadillac, Allstott, Eric Rett to some degree. They've had good running backs that they've drafted over the years. You can say the same for pass rushers. It's not always great, but they have hit on some. Leroy Selman, Warren Sapp, Gerald McCoy, Vita Vea, David Logan, Chidi Ahanatu, Brad Culpepper. Like, they've at least gotten a few guys throughout the years that have been solid or better. There's a couple of Hall of Famers that I just listed right there. But at quarterback, nope. Closest they got was Doug Williams, and it was Hugh Culverhouse that let him walk out of the door because of his own stupidity and biases. But not only that, you look at some of the quarterbacks that the Bucs passed on over the years for players that didn't work out. John Gruden famously told Aaron Rodgers that if he was available, he was going to be a Buccaneer. Instead, Gruden took Cadillac Williams, which, as I've said, he's one of my all-time favorite Buccaneers. But how different could this team have been if they took Aaron Rodgers instead of Cadillac Williams? The Bucs took Kenyatta Walker in 2001 at pick 14. Drew Brees went 32nd. Walker was done after 2006. Brees, Super Bowl champion and a future Pro Football Hall of Famer on the first ballot. In 2009, they take Josh Freeman at 17. That doesn't work out. 2012, they take Mark Barron in the top 10, and they pass on Ryan Tannehill. Now, I know that Tannehill wasn't great, but he was still a starter in the NFL in playoff games a couple of years ago, and Barron has been out of the league for years. Also, fair time to remind you that Russell Wilson went in the third round of that draft. That's the thing about the draft. It all looks good on paper, and you do your best to predict who's going to succeed, who's not, but I'm going to be honest, it's a complete crapshoot. There's no other way to put it. It's a roll of the dice. You are gambling. It is flat out gambling. That's it. The Bucs drafted Adrian Claiborne, and that didn't work out. And a few picks later, the Saints got Cameron Jordan. The Bucs used the 4th overall pick on Gaines Adams. They could have had Patrick Willis, Darrelle Revis, Joe Staley, Adrian Peterson. Think about that for a minute. Think about the fact that they passed on Adrian Peterson because they had Cadillac Williams. But had they passed on Cadillac for Aaron Rodgers, like Gruden said he was going to, the Buccaneers could have had Aaron Rodgers and Adrian Peterson. Imagine the dominance in the NFC that team could have had. For that matter, in that same draft, they could have possibly had Calvin Johnson. The Bucs wanted to move up for him, and Detroit said it was going to cost them cornerback Brian Kelly. Gruden said no. Brian Kelly goes to Detroit as a free agent after the season anyway. We can play this game all day, and we could do it with every single team in the NFL. But I think at the end of the day, it's safe to say that the Bucs have been the worst historically at drafting quarterbacks. They've had 2 that they drafted go on to win Super Bowls for other teams. Doug Williams was the Super Bowl MVP when the Washington Redskins won the Super Bowl. Trent Dilfer was just along for the ride in Baltimore and tried not to screw anything up as he got the benefit of one of the greatest defenses in NFL history carrying him to a Lombardi trophy. And by the way, this kind of just popped in my head. Is that the all-time worst quarterback matchup in a Super Bowl? Trent Dilfer versus Kerry Collins. If you come up with a worse quarterback matchup in a Super Bowl, drop it in the YouTube comments. Insiders, you can text me, you can tweet me, all those things. But I'm really curious if that is the worst one that we've ever had, because there isn't another one that comes to mind when thinking about that. But I'm not sure when or if the day will ever come that the Buccaneers actually draft a longtime franchise quarterback. At this point, just keep doing what you're doing. Scoop up free agents and build the rest of the team through the draft. It was 2 different free agent quarterbacks that got the first 2 Lombardis. Who's to say that it won't be another free agent quarterback that gets you the 3rd? That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Follow on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, and check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Bye.